Hey.
Um, so hi everyone, and thank you for coming today. We have a great panel today. It's the first seminar for the STEMulate the Vote initiative that the Johns Hopkins Science Policy Group has started. And so just in a technical note, use the chat, please, for any technical questions. Like if the slides are not moving, you cannot hear a panelist, and then use the Q&A for any questions that you may have to the panelists. And so we have three speakers, Melissa, Adrienne, and Shaughnessy. And so I think we're going to start with Melissa. She is the Science Network Community Manager and Partnerships Coordinator with the Center of Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. She manages the online community for the Science Network, which is a group of nearly 24,000 scientists and technical experts interested in science advocacy, which offers its members resources, trainings, webinars, and opportunities to get involved in the issues they care about. And prior to joining UCS, Melissa was a candidate outreach manager of the candidate project at the New Organizing Institute, where she helped train and provide online resources for citizens across the country who were running for local office. She earned an MA in political management from the George Washington University and a BA in English and political science from Marietta College. So, Melissa?
Thank you for that introduction. I'm excited to join you all today, and I'm going to do the awkward tech thing and pull up my slides. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. I'm also the lead organizer of Science Rising, and that's what I'll be mostly focused on today, about how you can engage your campus or your community leading up to the general election using some of the tools and resources that we have available through Science Rising. And Science Rising is a network of partners and advocates who are fighting for science, equity, and justice in our democracy leading up to the 2020 election and beyond. Science Rising is solely focused on nonpartisan ways to engage. And to engage with us, you don't need to be eligible to vote or registered to vote. I'm going to talk a lot about voting, but we think it's really important to provide opportunities for anyone to engage in our democracy, regardless of whether or not you're eligible to vote. And there are many ways that you can get involved, but there's one key thing I want to get across that the STEM community is doing right now, and that is rising up in 2020 to vote at higher rates than ever before. And I say that because it turns out that historically, STEM majors have voted at the lowest rates of any academic major. And I think all of us all on the call today can agree that that's just unacceptable. And this also illustrates the first takeaway that I wanted to share, because in order to increase turnout, it's better to emphasize that voting is a social norm. It's something that everyone is doing. You know, STEM majors are rising up. Even though that statistic about low STEM voter turnout may seem, very shocking and compelling and motivating to some of us, the research shows that talking about low voter turnout just perpetuates low voter turnout. So if you want to talk about, this statistic that we need to change about STEM majors voting at low rates, I'd encourage you not to lead with that, but instead lead with the idea that voting is something everyone is doing. Talk about the increasing trends of student voting, more broadly across the country, and then work in that STEM statistic later. But still, low turnout is something we clearly want to address, and the Science Rising Challenge is something that we created to make it as easy as possible to register, make a plan to vote, and get involved in different ways leading up to the November election. So there's a range of ways you can get involved. You can check out on the screen or on the website. All of these you can do remotely or online, so we've adjusted for the pandemic. And while it is possible to do all of these things as an individual, I'd also encourage you to think about ways that you can complete these activities as a group, partly because it's just more fun. The election season can be very stressful. I know I get stressed out thinking about the election a lot, and especially as we anticipate more voter suppression and misinformation in the coming weeks, engaging as a group can make this more inspiring and enjoyable. Engaging as a group also better positions you to continue this type of civic engagement after the election, which is really critical to the health of our democracy. We need people to stay engaged, not just every 2 or 4 years when there are important national elections, but really all the time. So as a group, you're better positioned to continue to maintain those relationships on your campus or in your community, and give people more opportunities to stay engaged after the election, regardless of the outcome. So we chose all of the activities featured in the challenge based on evidence around what works best to help build lifelong habits for participating in our democracy. And I wanted to highlight a few of them in more detail. And the first is recruiting 3 friends or family to vote, which we call tripling the science vote. So if you'll allow me to bring in some social science here, most people don't consider themselves to be quote unquote activists. We know that roughly only 3% of people volunteer on political campaigns, which I think you'll hear more about later. But obviously a lot more people than that vote. They still care about our democracy. They just don't consider themselves to be activists. So recruiting 3 friends to vote is not only something that you can do, recruiting 3 friends to vote is a low barrier of entry for less politically active people to get engaged. So students who haven't voted before, or people who haven't made up their mind about what candidates they're voting for, are more likely to commit to recruiting friends or family to vote. So this is sort of a vote multiplier. You can recruit 3 friends yourself, but then also get those friends to recruit 3 friends. We also know that non-activists have stronger ties to inconsistent voters, and that non-activists may be more influential to inconsistent voters than activists. So these folks may be more powerful messengers because they signal it's not just the usual suspects who are showing up and paying attention this time around, that this time everyone needs to show up and vote. So you don't need to be highly engaged in politics to use this tactic. In fact, it may be more effective if you're not. The key here is just making sure those folks commit to voting and then following up with them around important deadlines, like voter registration deadlines if they're not registered, or deadlines around requesting your vote by mail ballot. So set yourself a reminder, and then for yourself to request your vote by mail ballot, but then also remember to remind your friends and family about that too. And remember that anyone can recruit other folks to vote. You don't need to be eligible yourself. And you can do this safely online or via text. You don't need to do this in person. All right, talk to your fellow students about voter registration or important voting deadlines. Even a simple 5-minute presentation during a class can increase registration or turnout. There's been research that demonstrates that. Plus, many states will allow you to register to vote or check your registration online. So you really can do it from anywhere, even if you are attending class remotely this semester, that shouldn't be a barrier for you. So on sciencerising.org, you can check out sample slides that professors can use to integrate into their presentations to talk about voter registration. We even have guidance on our website about how you can pitch your professor to talk about voter registration in the class if you're looking for some sample language. Another great resource that just came out this week is the Scholar Strategy Network's Faculty Guide to Student Voting. It walks through simple steps that faculty can take to prepare students for the election. I can send that link around afterwards. And again, this is another way of illustrating my first point, which is that we should be talking about voting everywhere, including in STEM classrooms. We really need to get across this idea that voting is the social norm. Professors don't have to bring politics into it. In fact, No, they really shouldn't. It's better if they don't. But they can provide class time to normalize this idea that voting is something that you just do, including something that STEM majors do. Finally, op-eds are a great way to practice your science communication skills in your local community or on your campus paper, if that is something that is still running during these weird pandemic times. An op-ed is a short opinion piece that's usually written in response to an issue of local relevance or local importance. And this is an opportunity for you to make the case for why voting in this election is so critical specifically for your community. So bringing it down to as local a level as you can, thinking about what's really at stake for them in terms of the local issues. Are there local issues on the ballot, like ballot initiatives? Or are there local issues that you want candidates to talk about? You can pair up with a friend to write and edit the op-ed together. And the key here is to submit them quickly if you're responding to a specific news item. Particular hooks that you could consider writing about are important election-related deadlines, like that vote by mail deadline, or there are some civic holidays coming up. National Voter Registration Day is September 22nd. There's also Vote Early Day this year. So you could frame your op-ed around those things too. And the National Science Policy Network has a great model for this. They've been connecting student science policy groups with volunteer editors to help them shape up their op-eds and then submit them to local papers. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the National Science Policy Network. If you're interested, you could check them out for some examples of what they've already gotten published, or work with them to get some editing help on your op-ed. So I hope you'll consider checking out the Science Rising Challenge, completing the challenge as an individual or a group. If you need an additional incentive, we're giving away cool pins. But probably more importantly, we are also offering the chance for one challenge participant to attend the SACNAS National Diversity in STEM virtual conference coming up in October. So that's going to be awesome. You don't want to miss that. And remember that this work doesn't stop after the election. Regardless of the outcome, super important to continue building those local relationships and continuing to offer ways for folks to stay engaged. And my contact information is on the screen if you want to reach out, if you want to strategize, if you want to learn more about any of this. I am happy to nerd out with you anytime.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I do have a question. Once you started, I believe the Science Rising has been around for a while now for different election. How has been the STEM community response to it? I know that some people in STEM really don't feel compelled to participate in don't want to politicize themselves. And now that it's a very partisan and politicized world, how can we make it so that these people that are less likely to participate really see the benefit of participating in elections?
Yeah, well, again, we try to stay, very strictly nonpartisan, but I think just the polarized and partisan nature of our politics and how it has impacted science and scientists, especially in the past 4 years, has really demonstrated to people that they gain nothing by staying silent. Like, we all need to be more involved in our communities, to speak out and to get candidates talking about these important issues and get them on the record in these important issues. So I do think there's more willingness to it now. And I think Shaughnessy and Adrienne are going to talk more about the different ways that folks are getting involved too. I'm optimistic that this is just the beginning of the trend of more scientists and STEM students getting involved.
Awesome. That sounds great. We have some questions, but We're gonna probably continue with the panelists, and then at the very end, we're gonna have an open Q&A. So the questions that folks are asking are gonna be answered, but we're just gonna move on. Our next speaker is Adrian Rivera Reyes. He is a cancer biologist, community organizer, and advocate for BIPOC and LGBTQ+ rights. He obtained his PhD in cell and molecular biology with a concentration in cancer biology from the University of Pennsylvania. He is a community leader and serves as a commissioner on the Pennsylvania Governor's Advisory Commission on Latino Affairs. As a commissioner, he helps to inform the governor on issues affecting the Latinx community in Philadelphia and to advise on policies and legislation that impact the Latinx community in Pennsylvania. He is a founding member and organizer of Philly Boricuas, a grassroots organization that engages and helps to organize the Puerto Rican and Hispanic community in North Philadelphia around issues of justice and equity. And in his professional capacity, he has worked at the Abramson Family Cancer Research Institute at Penn and as a scientist for Spark Therapeutics. He is now a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the United States Agency for International Development.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm still finding my angle, how close or far away I should be from the camera. I will share my screen quickly. Let's see. Can you see it? We're good to go? Perfect. So, like Bernat said, my name is Adrian Rivera Reyes. I do have to put as a disclaimer that the views expressed and presented throughout this presentation are those of my own and represent only my own, not the views of my employer, my office, or the AAAS. And you'll get very used to, if you haven't had other fellows before, you've seen this for sure. What I'm going to share with you is going to be a little bit more different. It's going to be more my specific path, just as an example of what someone who's pursuing a PhD in STEM can do, and how we as students and as STEM majors can get involved in very different capacities. So I started with this timeline just to give you a little bit of an overview, but I'll go through growing up in Puerto Rico, doing undergrad at the University of Puerto Rico, then from there going to UPenn in Philly, and then running for office. And after running for office, right, big arrow, now I'm a fellow. And what you'll see is that from the very beginning, throughout this entire presentation, you'll see that there was always a community of some sort. There was some work with different communities as part of communities, and that's very crucial, which I don't think most people think about it, but all of you are part of many communities and you are working hand in hand, and we just don't generally think about it in that way. So growing up in Puerto Rico, I graduated from military high school. It was, of course, private, but I tell people this because the reason I was able to attend this school was because I had volleyball scholarship. That was the way for my parents to be able to afford a good education for myself and for my brother. This is me at one of the best beaches. Also, just disclaimer, you'll see a lot of hairstyles and growth throughout. So judge or don't, it's up to you. But yeah, this is just a nice beach in Culebra for those of you that have been. And this right here on the right is a Thanksgiving food drive that my parents have been organizing for the past, 15 or 16 years. And this is actually my mom in the hairnet who's serving food. And this food drive, we basically just on Thanksgiving Day, bring all the food and just give out to the homeless community that's actually just a couple of blocks away from where the University of Puerto Rico is. So I grew up doing that for a big chunk and throughout undergrad. And so this is what I mean, right? Like there were components of my story throughout that involved different communities and getting involved with communities. So from my studies, this was one of our younger members, the one who's hiding her face, of Un Rayito de Sol en Tu Habitación. This group here is a nonprofit, and this nonprofit specifically was started by the little girl that's hiding her face and her brother, who's the one in the middle, right behind the banner, and their parents. And basically, since high school, we were visiting pediatric cancer patients at the San Jorge Children's Hospital. And so from there's where that curiosity for me grew up, right, for cancer research and for research. And it was mostly medicine, right? And then as I got to the University of Puerto Rico, which this is the tower on the right, I pivoted more to the research side as opposed to the medicine side. And this is just a really great picture of the tower at night. The banner reads, Venceremos siempre, which is, we will always win, or we will always rise. And it was a banner that students put during one of the protests that happened in 2010-11. So once at the University of Puerto Rico, I started doing research there. And like most of you, I went to summer internships. I did one at Washington University in St. Louis, which this was the group. I believe the arch is, we're facing the arch, so you don't see it there. And then this is me at the end of the program as a young scientist, explaining my science, probably not great, but still doing it to someone who came by. And then the summer after, I went to the University of Pennsylvania. This is the Love sculpture on campus at the University of Penn's campus. And this was me presenting my research. Again, see very different haircuts, glasses, everything. And then my PhD. So I joined the Eisinger lab. I will say, and feel free to ask any question that you want, but this was my second thesis lab. I joined a different thesis lab. It didn't work out, and I switched, and I was able to join this wonderful group of scientists with this amazing mentor in the middle, and we were looking at Western blots right there, for those of you that know, just looking at data, trying to interpret it. And on the right, that's my PhD mentor hooding me on graduation day. Very proud. It was a lot. There was a lot of struggles, but I was able to find a mentor who was open and welcome all of my different activities outside of the lab. And despite everything that happened, and switching labs and everything else that I was involved with, I finished my PhD in 4 years and a couple of months. So that was a big accomplishment for me as well. And so getting involved, right? So while at Penn and doing research and pipetting, I was doing a lot of things. This is us at the March for Science. That's my nephew right there on my shoulders. And the three on the right, on the top right, the three of us, we were the student, we led the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Philadelphia March for Science in 2017. So that's a way for people to get organized, right? Or get involved in different activities. And the lady that's holding the I'm with her banner, she is one of my mentors and an incredible person that maybe a lot of you have heard of, but she was also a former fellow. And after many years of staying in federal government, she ended up being the deputy scientific advisor to the Secretary of State, which for a couple of months was Hillary Clinton, and then for 4 years, John Kerry during the Obama administration. Also at Penn, I led the science policy and diplomacy group, and this picture at the bottom right is after our first symposium, which then NSPN formed, which Melissa mentioned, and we then started collaborating more and helping with that bigger, larger symposium. But I wanted to take the opportunity to show the Penn Club volleyball team that was very, very fun. And it definitely provided me enough distraction plus exercise to take my mind away from everything else that I was working on and research and whatnot. And fun fact, that year, for very special circumstances, a lot of things happened that weren't planned, but this team ended up being placing 5th in the entire country. So, and yeah, right? Another great thing about 2018. And getting even more involved. So as part of the science policy and diplomacy group on the top left, I was involved with the graduate student government, and Penn has a diplomacy and global management center that's here in Washington, DC. And we as students went with a group of other grad students from all over the country down to DC to lobby Congress people and senators on issues specific to graduate students and science and whatnot. So there's also that advocacy side that you can do, but also getting involved with political campaigns. So this guy in the middle, so the picture in the middle, Mike Doyle, as you can see from the shirt and the banner in the back, he's the one on the right wearing the glasses and the hood. He was running for state rep. I met him through many channels, I don't even remember at this point, but I was helping him out. This was election day. And on the far right, top right, that's Molly Sheehan. Molly was a postdoc at Penn at the moment that I met through the Penn Science Policy and Diplomacy Group, and she was running for United States Congress in Philly. And so I wanted to get involved in her campaign. I was very excited for many reasons, shared very similar values, plus it was the scientist, running for office, and we need more of those, so I wanted to be in on it. And this day we were actually canvassing and door knocking, which is what the bottom left picture also, what we were doing, the 5 of us. But something that I did for Molly, and that's another way of getting involved, was for the very majority of her campaign, I was just doing policy research. The campaign and Molly as a candidate had questions that they themselves don't have the time. And so I was helping draft these policy memos and policy briefs for the campaign, doing the research myself and putting that information there for them in order for them to inform and make sure that their positions on issues were also evidence-based. And then Molly, who is a trusted mentor and friend and also used to be a neighbor in Philly, pushed me to run for office myself, and I ran for city council. And as you can tell from all of these pictures, it involves talking to a lot of people. I will say that before running for office and through everything else that I was doing during grad school, there were many events that we planned with Shaughnessy and 314. Actually, at our symposium, Michael Halpern came. At the time, he was the director for the Center for Science and Democracy of the Union of Concerned Scientists. So Melissa and Shaughnessy have been seeing me and grow for a long time at this point. But it involved a lot of talking, running for office. As you can see, right, top left, that's me talking to constituents. In the middle, you have to talk to reporters, you have to talk to the media. That's just how it is. In the right, that's a rally. And it was about the Green New Deal. That was for the Sunrise Movement in Philly. And then the bottom left actually was me getting signatures to appear on the ballot. And I rode every morning for the 3 weeks, the train from 7 a.m. until 10 a.m., just from one end to the other, one end to the other. and talking to people, getting them to, letting them know what I stood for and asking them to, give their signature so I could appear on the ballot, and so forth. So the result of that was I got to vote for myself, which was very surreal because it's not a normal experience, or not a common experience, I would say, that you go to the poll and you see your name on the ballot. These are my parents. They came from Puerto Rico for that weekend. I will say that weekend was my 27th birthday, my PhD graduation, and then election day in the span of 4 days. And, part of building and running for office, right, and having that community is getting people to support. And so you can see in this picture, these were different endorsements. You can see, for example, on the bottom right, 314 Action was one of my endorsers. And that's in part, right, because Shaughnessy and 314 knew who I was and we had a relationship, right? And I will say that there was a moment where Shaughnessy invited me to the 314 Action offices, and she sat down with me and we did call time together to fundraise. And so, a lot of this comes from building and having those relationships with people, and genuine relationships, right? And fighting for the same issues. And there you go. But that didn't happen for me. There were 28 candidates at the end. At the beginning, there were 34. 28 ended up being in the ballot for 5 seats. And I lost by less than 1.5 votes. So it was very, very close, but it didn't happen. But again, my commitment wasn't to just running for office and whatnot. It was to a community, right? And many communities that were on my run and that I was part of, that I had been investing in and love and care deeply about, and that I am still involved with. So this is a lot of protests at the top with Fili Boricuas. On the top left, the lady in the middle that's holding the What's Your Puerto Rico policy, that's Kendra Brooks. And she actually that November was the first independent ever to win a seat in city council in Philadelphia. So she's councilwoman or council member Brooks. And then here are some other pictures, and this was organizing with Penn Environment on the bottom right about completely different, environmental issues, doing a forum. But I will say, because of this and this invitation they extended to me that day, we created a relationship and fostered a really good relationship. And just yesterday, we decided to unite behind an issue that had to do with LNG, liquefied natural gas. And we won the first fight, right? And it was Fili Boricuas with Penn Environment and all the environmental groups. And it was, really big because even, Mark Ruffalo made a video about the implications of this project. And we were all mind blown, right? That this group of Puerto Ricans from the diaspora in Philly ended up working in an issue that someone of such a high profile cares about. And last but not least, because of this work and having run for office, I was appointed as a commissioner. And on the right here, you see all the commissioners to the Latino Affairs Commission for the Pennsylvania's governor. And here's me signing it at the bottom left. And so I get to do a lot of the work that I do with Fili Boricuas, but also amplify it throughout the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And then on the top here is the Pennsylvania delegation at the Victory Fund, which I am also now a board member. And the Victory Fund is a national group that endorses LGBTQ candidates for every office possible. And so in summary, what can I do as a STEM researcher, right? What can we do as STEM researchers? Well, the first is you can take the Science Rising Challenge from the Union of Concerned Scientists. So make sure that you register to vote, you make your plan to vote, And then you take on a third challenge, which preferably is making sure you take 3 people to vote, right? But it can be many things. Cultivate genuine relationships, right? Through all of this. And I think the best way to do that for me was just doing stuff that I was really passionate about and that I cared about, right? Because that shows, and then you end up working and doing things that you think are really cool, and then people see that you're interested and that you care. And so genuine relationships will develop from that work as well. Seek out your communities, and there are many, right? We all contain multitudes, and there are many communities that we belong to that we should, seek out and make sure that we are part of them and organize them. Volunteer for a campaign also that shares your values. And when I say campaign, I don't necessarily mean political campaign. Yes, I did that. But it could be a campaign that the UCS is holding. It could be this exact same thing that you are doing at Johns Hopkins, right? This is a campaign of some sort, right? It's a campaign to get STEM students to go out and vote and to get more involved. So all of these things are campaigns, and you can get involved and get involved in some that are of interest to you. And if you're really, really interested and this is in you, you can run for office. It is not for everyone. And I certainly don't encourage anyone unless they really want to do it. But yeah, and that's it for me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Adrian. That was great, very inspiring. I had a quick question. So you said you run for office while you were finishing your PhD. I'm not gonna ask just how you did it, but how do you leverage putting your scientific background as a benefit, as something that voters should, really take as a positive thing? And the fact that some people will say your credibility as a scientist then gets lower because you're taking an actual stance on issues, and scientists should just focus on doing science and leave the policy and the rest for other people. So how do you put, those two things next to each other,
I'll start with the first part, which was the easy part. I don't know, a lot of time management and lack of sleeping. It definitely helped that I had a thesis mentor that was open and, was okay and very supportive of me running for office. I will also say that I defended my PhD in December, and I didn't start actually running until January. I was still in the lab, but that changed the dynamics because I had also delivered to my PI what she needed out of me as a student, right? And as a member of her lab. But she was also very, very supportive of everything. So yeah, time management, having people to help out for sure. And yeah, on some days it was just hard. For the second part, I guess, how do you balance the credibility, right? Of being a scientist and running for office and having to take stands on issues. I think scientists for a long time have been, and this is part of what I call the ivory tower, right? Is we've had this privilege as scientists, which is something that we talk a lot about nowadays when it comes to racial justice issues. There's a lot of people that had the privilege to be like, no, not me. I can step away. But science is political. Science is not partisan. And that's where people and scientists get it confused. Science is political. Science, what better example than the pandemic that we're in, right? And so I don't think it actually did anything to lower my credibility as a science. If anything, right? It provided examples as to how you can use science to take stances on issues that are evidence-based, right? And that are informed by science, right? So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes. I mean, I do think that kind of, oh, you shouldn't run, your credibility is going to lower, not only comes maybe from voters, but even within the STEM community. I think there's certain people that really don't want their credibility to be lowered or undermined because someone else that's also a scientist may run for office. But as you said, I agree that science is political and not partisan. So awesome. And now we had the third speaker, Shaughnessy. She is the founder and president of 314 Action. She is an entrepreneur with a degree in chemistry from Bryn Mawr College and a passion for understanding the role of science in our everyday life. With a background in research and drug discovery, she got involved in politics out of concern for the future of science in the US. In 2014, after running a business for over a decade, she stepped up to run for Congress in Pennsylvania's 8th District. With no prior political experience other than phoning legislators and knocking on doors for campaigns, she faced an uphill battle, to say the least. Ultimately, Shaughnessy was not successful, but she did receive tremendous amount of support from the scientific community. Through her campaign, she learned that there are not enough people with scientific backgrounds in Congress, and that we see the effects of that in the attempted politicization of science, mocking of basic research, and denial of climate change. This is not just bad for science, it's also bad for our country. And so she founded 314 Action to encourage and unite the scientific community to do more than just advocate for science and to get involved in the political process. That means run for office at any level, organize and call on your representatives to stand with science and to make your voices heard. So, Shaughnessy.
Hello, thank you. I am going to share my screen. Right. Thank you for that introduction and great presentation, Melissa and Adrian. I am Shaughnessy Naughton. I'm the founder of 314 Action. 314, of course, the first 3 digits of pi, and a nod to what we are trying to do to get more scientists involved. So 314 Action, what we work to do is to recruit, train, and elect scientists to public office from city council up through the state legislature and the US House and Senate, with the thinking that we benefit by having a diversity of experience, and in particular, having people that are scientifically trained, analytical thinkers that will base their policies on facts and evidence. And as obvious as that may seem to people on this call, that is often not how things happen in Congress. And you know, this organization grew out of my own experience. I did run for Congress in 2014, and at the time discovered there were more talk radio show hosts in Congress than scientists and engineers. And think about what that does to both the priorities and the process. And although I wasn't successful in my run, you know, when I did run, I had to get very creative because you know, part of what you have to do when you run for Congress is raise money. And there's kind of this little thing that nobody gives you money if you've never raised money before. And so it makes it hard to raise money. And I don't come from a wealthy family. You know, we can all bemoan the role of money in politics, but there is a reality that you can have the best candidate in the world, but if you don't have the resources to communicate and people don't know who you are, they're not going to vote for you. And so you either have to write that check yourself or raise the money. And when I ran, the Democratic Party had already picked a candidate as their guy. So I was locked out of those traditional Democratic donors. And what we started doing was making lists of chemists, because that was my background, and cold calling chemists around the country, going state by state, making the case that even if they couldn't vote for me, we would benefit by having more scientists and chemists in office. And from chemists, we expanded to, you know, other scientists, and started building out this network of people that were concerned about where our country was headed, and the fact that there are so many politicians that continue to deny the reality of climate change. So 2018 was our first cycle. You know, we operate in 2-year cycles. 2018 was our first full cycle of recruiting and electing scientists. And the way we start that process is, you know, we look at how the map looks, you know, starting at the congressional level, where there are incumbents that are denying climate change. That's usually our first place that we look to target. And then we start reaching out to folks in the districts that we think we have a chance of flipping, and work to, you know, identify the districts and then recruit candidates to run, and then show them how to do it. You know, starting a campaign is kind of like starting a business. You want to raise money and not spend it. And so that's where our organization at 314 Action tries to help, to show, often these scientists don't come from political backgrounds, you know, they've never run for office before, and it's not as intuitive as you might think. And so we really try to show them best practices. We work with them to give them strategic advice, help them write their campaign plan, a finance plan, and then continue to monitor their success. Once we endorse a candidate, we write our PAC check, which is how we can contribute directly to them, and then start fundraising on their behalf. So kind of what Adrian referenced when he ran. You know, he came into the office, into my office, and we started calling some of our donors in Philadelphia that we thought would be interested in hearing from Adrian, and letting him make the case as to why we needed a scientist on city council in the 5th largest city in the country. So for this cycle, we've really grown the organization. In 2018, our budget was 5.2 million. For this cycle, our budget will be closer to 20 million, which is really a tremendous increase, and I think really speaks to the growing concern among the scientific community, but also the people I call the friends of science. When you see this administration just denying reality over and over and over again, you know, it has a lot of people concerned. And this crisis that that we are living through, the reason we are all on a Zoom call instead of meeting in person, this pandemic has been so poorly mishandled, because you know, it really is a textbook case as to what happens when science and expertise is ignored and undermined. And a similar case could be made for climate change in the perhaps a less immediate future. So, you know, one of the challenges I think for scientists is what was referenced before as well, is that, you know, traditionally scientists kind of looked at politics and science is above politics, and therefore scientists shouldn't be involved in politics. And I would argue that has failed us. That model has failed us. You know, politicians are unashamed to meddle in science, and we are not going to win that war by pretending that they should just, or by wishing them to just stay out. We're going to win that war by claiming a seat at the table and getting more scientists elected. So this is, these are the freshman members that we helped elect in 2018. Jackie Rosen went from being a freshman member in the U.S. House of Representatives to now in the U.S. Senate, and the others listed there are freshman U.S. House, the U.S. Congress members, all with really interesting and diverse backgrounds. and all, they all won their races, really leveraging their STEM backgrounds to talk about local issues that were important to the people they were seeking to represent. And, that the American people overwhelmingly trust scientists. And especially in this moment, in this pandemic, they are looking to the scientists and public health officials to lead us out of this crisis. And it really presents an opportunity for candidates with STEM backgrounds to distinguish themselves and also establish trust with the people they're looking to represent. These are, we call them the STEM trailblazers. These are the members that were already elected before we founded 314 Action, but have STEM backgrounds. And like I said, we do get involved in races beyond the federal level. So we had a number of state legislative victories in 2018, all over the country. In 2019, our scientists helped flip the Virginia House of Delegates, which allows them to, really work on the issues that a lot of us care the most about. And then, we knew sort of anecdotally and at our gut level that people and Americans trust scientists, but we did actually do some focus groups and polling both last year, and then we updated it again during the pandemic to see where people are on the issue. And voters are more favorable to candidates with a background in science than other professions. And think about, this latest poll was from early April. Who would have thought we would still be in the midst of this crisis 7 months later? So this sentiment among Americans has only intensified. And we see that in polling over and over and over again throughout the country. And one of the things that people are really looking for, Americans are really looking for from their representatives, are representatives that are going to base their policies on facts and evidence, even more than on what their constituents say they want. They do trust people that are going to make that case. So for 2020, we are putting a lot of focus on winning the US Senate. So we have 4 scientists running for Senate. I'm not sure where I am on time. Do you want me to go through these or briefly? Okay. In Colorado, for the US Senate, challenging Cory Gardner, we have John Hickenlooper. He has a master's in geology, worked in the oil and gas industry before he founded breweries around the Denver area, and which is also chemistry, right? And he served 2 terms as governor and is running for the US Senate. We also have Dr. Al Gross in Alaska. He is an independent challenging Dan Sullivan, freshman member of the Alaska delegation. He is an orthopedic surgeon, a commercial fisherman, and he killed a bear with his bare hands. So I don't know what the bear was doing, but he has a very interesting story. He also has a master's in public health and is making tremendous progress. It's always difficult to challenge an incumbent, but I encourage you to keep an eye on this race. I think this will be the big upset of 2020. In Arizona, we also have Mark Kelly running for U.S. Senate, challenging Martha McSally, who was appointed to the seat that was vacated when Senator McCain passed away. So Mark Kelly is a NASA astronaut. He is also the husband of Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman who had been shot in Tucson a while back now. So a very strong advocate for gun reform, and as well as on climate change. He tells, part of his story is you know, how much the Earth has changed as, you know, through his trips to space and seeing that from space. And then in Kansas, we have Dr. Barbara Bollier. She's an anesthesiologist, a state senator, and running for the open seat in Kansas. We also have some House challengers for the U.S. House. Nancy Goroff is in Long Island. She is the former chair of the chemistry department at Stony Brook. She also was one of my early supporters when I ran for Congress, so I have a lot personally invested in seeing her win this race. And she's just putting together a tremendous campaign. It's a tough district, it's an expensive district, but I think we will be seeing her in Congress next year. And then Cameron Webb is a physician and an attorney. He was a health advisor to President Obama and President Trump. And he is a hospitalist at the University of Virginia. As he says, he teaches the class on health equity, which is a very timely topic. And just a tremendous person, candidate. I'm very excited about his campaign. And then we also have a physician, Geralda Bernini, in Arizona. She is running in Maricopa County. So it is one of those counties where the demographics are really changing. And she is a Indian American. She came here as a child. And I think that especially at this time when immigrants are being marginalized and demonized by members of this administration, I think having immigrants in elected office is incredibly important. So what's next? I guess I should have updated the slide. We are no longer recruiting for 2020, but 2022, 2021, we hope to reinitiate the candidate trainings in the next year. We might have to continue to do them virtually. You know, in 2018, the Washington Post declared it the year of scientists running for Congress. I want to see that every year. So I do encourage you all, you know, you're here today, so you're obviously interested, but get involved, attend a training, run for office, reach out to your elected officials, and please make sure to register to vote. Don't ever feel that your question is too stupid, you know, that you can't ask if you're, about how to register, how to vote. It is a little confusing if you've never done it, and so just ask. It's not, there's no harm in that. You know, just to reiterate what Melissa had said, voter participation among STEM students is among the lowest. So we really want to see that improved. And that's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. And with that, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. We have a few questions that we can get through, and I think with timing, it's going to work well. I think, Melissa, you just answered one, but for the rest of the people, we can just ask it again. Sorry about that. The question was, outside of talking about voting as a social norm, are there different tactics that are more appropriate for discussing voting to professionals from different STEM fields, like science versus tech versus engineering?
And I haven't seen any specific data on what type of messaging works best with STEM voters, but I can say that based on what we know about general voter messaging and engagement, that connecting it back to other issues they care about is really important. So if it's an engineer talking about infrastructure, if they're studying technology, talking about cybersecurity, making it clear that, you know, these issues do impact all of us, and in some ways these issues are always on the ballot. So it's important for them to do some research and be aware of how they can't escape that science is political, I guess. I would also suggest there's a research that I link, or a report that I linked to in the chat about specific ways to increase student voter engagement and turnout. It's based on behavioral science. I found it a really fascinating read, so be sure to check that out. That's from Ideas 42. But I'd also be curious to hear if Shaughnessy and Adrienne had anything to add about, how they talked with members of the STEM community to get them to turn out.
Well, I would just add to that, not only is science political, it's funded by taxpayers. And so it really, a lot of it is funded by taxpayers. And a lot of the things that you care about, whether it's healthcare or the cost of education, or steady funding of research, it makes sense to make sure your voice is being heard at the ballot box when you care about those issues.
The only piece I would add to both of those comments would be, more on what Melissa was saying about making sure that you relate back your background as a scientist to issues that people care, right? Like my background wasn't in climate sciences or soil or water, nothing like that. It was cancer research. But I was the main person, the only candidate of 34 for most of the campaign talking about a Green New Deal for Philadelphia and what that would look like, right? And how that would impact communities specifically, and talking about things like how in North Philadelphia, it's just a neighborhood that right now, because there are barely any green space, it's 2 degrees warmer than the rest of the city, right? And how it's gonna get warmer. Plus it's a community that's very impoverished, right? So most of them don't even have access to AC or heating, right? So like there's all of these dynamics that play. And just as a scientist, I know we have imposter syndrome, a lot of it, but you do understand the data, right? And something that I've learned now through these like few weeks of orientation for the fellowship is that when you go to the federal government, no one working for any of those people, for any of the Congress people, is an expert in everything. Like no one, right? But they're all good at researching, right? And going on a computer and making sure. And I assure you that all of you as scientists have a much better background in understanding data, interpreting data, and then putting that to work and explaining that to people. So don't doubt yourself.
Another question that we had, I think that applies for Adrienne and Shaughnessy, which was, at what point in your career path did you feel first inspired to run for office? And what were some of the advantages and disadvantages that candidates with PhDs, I'm assuming in STEM, face?
Do you want to go first, Adrienne?
I can go first. I gotta laugh, because there is a lot to that question and I appreciate it. But I think for me specifically, I was very civically engaged, clearly, and hopefully I convey that through all the pictures I showed, which should have been less, but that was kind of the point. And so, and very attached to community work and working with communities. But I kind of had the bug in me and the interest to do it. And realizing that in Philly, in a place where I made community that I still call home, right? My home away from home. There were many communities that I was part of, right? And I think this taps into another question that was asked later about identities, right, and personalities and different life experiences. But many communities that I was part of that had never had a seat at the table in city council in Philly, right? So being someone with so many intersectionalities, being Latinx, right? Being specifically within that Puerto Rican in a city that is 12% Puerto Rican, right? And 17% Latinx. being LGBTQ in a city that has never had an openly out council member elected, right? And so, and then being a scientist. And so all of those things were part of it. And I think those were advantages, and those are things that us as scientists are really good at, is that even though we go into our projects and, you know, specify in very, very, very niche things, we understand the implications and how things are connected. And so that was an advantage. In terms of disadvantage, I mean, Shaughnessy said it during her presentation, the network, right? Coming from a working class Puerto Rican family, my network being mostly students, right? 65% of all my donations for my campaign were small dollar donations. The study in Philly considers $250 small dollar donations. I assure you that 95% of my small dollar donations were 50 or less, definitely closer to 20, 25. And so, you know, that was a big hurdle to overcome, because if you can't raise money, people won't give you money, right? So you need to have access to wealth. And so that was definitely a disadvantage that you have to work with. And then how do politics work, right? I learned that on the go, and it was painful but rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, so mine was kind of a growing, what motivated me to run was a growing frustration with the lack of action in Congress. You know, it was in 2013, after the Sandy Hook massacre, they still did nothing to try to prevent that from happening again. They wouldn't even allow the CDC to collect data on gun violence. You know, the fact that Congress at the time had voted 50 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act rather than try to fix it. And it just became very obvious to me that this wasn't a problem that science could fix itself. Science knows that you want to solve the gun problem issue, gun violence issue, you need to collect data. You know, science knows that it can make wonderful treatments, cancer treatments or treatments for diseases, but if you can't afford them, what good does it do for a lot of people? And so what became obvious to me was that this wasn't a problem with science, and it wasn't going to be fixed by science alone. It was a problem with the policymakers. And so the only way we were going to change it was to change the policymakers. And let me tell you, whether, you know, running for city council in Philadelphia or for Congress, that is not dipping your toe in the water. That is jumping right in the deep end. And I honestly did not know what I was getting myself into, and probably wouldn't have done it if I did. But I learned a lot. I challenged myself in ways that, you know, I am not an extroverted person. I don't particularly love to talk about myself all day. And previously I was not a very good public speaker. And I've improved all of those things. Hopefully I don't talk about myself too much, but you do have to, when you run for Congress or for office, you have to let people know who you are and what your values are. And so, you know, I think it's a good life lesson too, especially for young students and researchers, to be open to new challenges, and, you know, not be confined by your original view of what success will be, because your life will be a lot richer by taking chances, you know, doing your research, and but taking those chances, being open to them, and then learning from them, and you know, seeing where that brings you next in your life.
Yeah, and I think there's like another question that I think Adrian kind of touched a little on, which was that STEM professionals often lead with their position in science and engineering, and how do candidates leverage other aspects of their personality to complement that background in STEM?
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things is that as a scientist, right, in pop culture, there in most people's that aren't scientists, There is no such thing as a mediocre scientist, right? There's only ever brilliant scientists in pop culture. And for a lot of people, that is their truth. So the advantage that you have as a scientist running for office is that they assume you're smart. And if you say, and they also assume you're honest. And so when you say something, it's given a lot of credibility. And so, you know, part of it, but you don't win people over, you don't win voters over by facts and evidence. You win them by them feeling confidence in you, that they share your values, that you share their values, and that you care about them. And so it's a part of your story, and I think it's a very important part. But ultimately, the way you win over voters is by showing your passion, your compassion, and you know that you understand what it is they care about.
I mean, I would say that that's exactly what I mean when I talked about being with communities, right? And being part of those communities, working with those communities, like seeking out your communities. It also applies in this context of running for office. But yeah, but you have to show people that you care and explain your positions. But honestly, most people, especially you know, working class communities, Black and brown, you know, working class, working poor people, like a lot of the time they just want to be listened to, right? And make sure that you're listening to them, that they feel that you are someone that has their back, right? And so it's what Shaughnessy said, right? That empathy, that compassion, that understanding. And, you know, and that definitely takes you over, right? The top, and is what actually brings communities. And then once you have that, then you're able to, right? And this doesn't apply to everyone, but once you have that, then you're able to explain more your positions and see how that actually fits with what the communities want and need. So.
We have just one more question, and I think we can broaden it a little bit. It was specifically for Shaughnessy regarding the new donors that motivated to donate to 314 Action, and whether that was due to the pandemic, or, you know, what was their motivation. But I think we can extend it also to, you know, with Adrian's community organizing and Melissa working with UCS, have you guys seen, because of the pandemic, or maybe because of 2020, an increase in engagement, you know, in from the STEM community, but also from other communities? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I would say probably starting with the election of Donald Trump, that really has woken up the scientific community to realize that this isn't a problem that's going to fix itself, and that they need to get involved. When we announced our first candidate training for scientists who are interested in running for office in January of 2017, I thought I was being pretty bold by saying that, you know, we would have 1,000 scientists want to join us, and instead we had 7,000. So it was, you know, and we've just continued to see more. And even during this pandemic, I'm hearing from a lot of particularly health professionals, physicians and nurses, that are thinking about running next year or in, you know, in the next federal election, because they are concerned. You know, they are motivated by the exact moment that we are in, and to make sure it doesn't happen again and we're better prepared. So I think I said this earlier, but the pandemic and the failed response to it has really shown Americans the danger of ignoring science, and they are, you know, I mean, they see it. You know, it may have been funny when Trump was doing things, or before saying crazy things or, you know, drawing alternate paths of hurricanes, you know, but when people are dying and people's livelihoods are being destroyed, and you know, this pandemic has exposed so many inequalities in our society that were obviously there before, but for a lot of people they didn't see them or didn't notice it before. And so I think it really has motivated people to get involved and you know, and participate. And I did an interview with Bloomberg News a couple weeks ago, and the reporter said to me, "Oh, well, you know, this is the moment that 314 Action was created for." And I said, "No, 314 Action was created so we wouldn't have this moment." and you know, and I encourage you all to think about that and the difference you can make in your community by getting involved.
I'd say a big +1 to everything Shaughnessy just said. I also think we've seen scientists showing up in different ways in 2020 because of the pandemic, but also because of the uprisings around racism and racial justice. You know, I want to highlight Ciencia Puerto Rico and their effort to get op-eds published, Spanish language op-eds published, to, you know, get information out to their community because they saw that gap and mobilize people to address it, which was really exciting. We've seen scientists not just in the public health space, but really across the STEM community step up in light of the Black Lives Matter protests, to call out racism within the scientific community and say, enough is enough. We need to recognize where we have caused harm and start seriously addressing systemic racism within our own institutions. So I think in some ways 2020 has been different, and I hope to see those trends continue. But I also think, as Shaughnessy mentioned, this is part of a larger trend we've seen since the 2016 election, where scientists have realized they can't sit this one out anymore.
Well, this makes it really easy for me because I can just say ditto, right? Yeah, don't sit this one out. You know, don't stay at home. What you do as scientists impacts society, and we need people that understand it, right? And that understand it and that know how to use the information appropriately. And you know, I said at the beginning, right, like science is political, not partisan, right? A great response to this pandemic would have prevented so many lives, you know, would have saved so many lives, would have, you know, all of these things. And it is, you know, like other countries are doing much better, you know, their economies back reopen and all of these other things that we care about as a country. And that would have actually helped the people at the top politically as well, right? A good response. And that's, you know, it doesn't have to be like that. Science is something that any person should be behind because, again, science seeks to explain and give proof. And so that's why, you know, science is political. We are living in that example. And I encourage you all to, you know, get involved in everything. UCS has a lot of amazing resources that are not necessarily politics or political, right? Or like campaign specific, like political campaigns, but also there is that other option that you can get involved to that's on the political partisan side as well.
Awesome. I just shared for all the other attendees the link for the next webinar, which is going to be next week with Chanel Matney and Yvette Seeger. But I wanted to say a huge thank you to Melissa, Adrian, and Shaughnessy. It's been a pleasure to have you for our first webinar. I'm assuming to all the attendees, if they have extra questions, I'm sure they can reach out to you. yeah, just wanted to thank you again for being here, for taking the time to, engage in this conversation. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.